Histories by Herodotus is a very comprehensive book. It's very detailed, even though it covers so many topics. And one of the things that you learn as you read through the book is that in the ancient world, especially the world during the time that Herodotus lived, which is like 500 BCE, that's like 2,500 years ago. In that world, sacrificing was a critical component of religion, worship, and prayer. You realize that almost every nation, every tribe had some kind of sacrificing that had to be done during specific times or for specific functions. So it was so common. You read through the book, and the Herodotus covers so many nations, small and big ones. And one thing is common in almost all these societies that it covers is the sacrificing. That is everywhere. It is in Europe, it is in Asia, it is in Africa. It's everywhere. Every tribe he talks about, there is a component of sacrificing. Okay, the sacrificing was not the same, of course. Every tribe had its own way of doing sacrificing. And also, what was acceptable for offering to the gods was also not the same. And also, it's important to mention that, of course, they were not worshiping the same gods. And even where two tribes or two nations worship the same god, it was always the case that they will have different rituals of sacrificing to that same god. It wasn't like it was really homogeneous or the same or uniform. So yeah, animals were sacrificed, plants were sacrificed, crops, that is, but it was mostly animals. And I remember in a video that I did a while back, I did mention that one of the things that I found so interesting is the practice of killing an animal and then getting its internal organs and trying to read signs. I found that interesting, in particular because that's a practice that is here in Africa where I've grown, and there are tribes that do that. So I found that to be interesting that especially Greeks especially were doing it. And then I see it, or I've learned that many African tribes were doing it, or they still do it. Some still do it if you go to some places in Africa. Yeah, you go to the rural parts, you'll find people doing that. Now, I've mentioned that even though plants was given as offerings to the gods, animals were like the more common thing that was offered to the gods. And for most nations, they limited that to just animals, even though, of course, they decided which animals they preferred. Persians sacrificed, but mostly animals, horses, and cattle, sheep, goats. Egyptians, the same. Egyptians sacrificed mostly sheep. They didn't sacrifice goats because Herodotus explains that they saw goats as sacred. They also did not sacrifice cattle. They also saw cattle or cows as somehow sacred. But they sacrificed sheep and they sacrificed pigs or swine a lot. When you go to Babylon, they also sacrificed animals. Much of Greece, they sacrificed animals, goats, sheep. Uh, all these places sacrifice mostly domestic animals, and a few of them. I think Herodotus mentioned that in Egypt they did sacrifice birds, and this was yeah, they did sacrifice some birds. So even birds and domestic animals mostly. But then there were a few that went to the extreme. There are a few nations that went to the extreme, and they sacrifice fellow human beings, mostly captured uh, people were captured at war. And I need to mention this. I did say that the Persian didn't sacrifice humans, but there is a place in the book where Herodotus describes a situation where they did. And that happens when Xerxes leads his army to, to, to Europe. At some point, when the war between the Greeks and the Persians starts, in fact, the very first battle that happens, it happens at sea. And the Persians capture a ship and they kill everyone, and then they capture one guy, and the name of the guy is Leo. I remember he's mentioned, Herodotus give his name. And the Persians thought he was the most beautiful of the Greeks they had seen, or one of the most beautiful. And because of that, they decided to offer him to the gods as a sacrifice. So even societies that did not, it was not a common practice, sometimes under special circumstances, they did offer humans for sacrifice. Yeah, so I remember that happens with the Persians, especially as Xerxes was going to Europe. Now, but there are tribes that it was more common. But before I move to that, I also need to mention this. Herodotus gives stories about Egyptians and sacrificing humans. And there are two stories that Egyptians and maybe I should say the Greeks. And he mentions that there was a story was told about Heracles. Heracles was like a god. So this is like a mythical story. And he's told that Heracles went to Egypt. And when in Egypt, the Egyptian captured him and they tried sacrificing. But he overpowered the people who were trying to sacrifice him and he killed them basically. But then Herodotus does explain that he doesn't believe that because Egyptians were not people who sacrificed humans. So it was not part of their culture. So he could not understand how that story fits in because according to him, Egyptians couldn't do that. So he discredits that story based on that. Then there is this other thing that happened. It was, I think, either it was a Greek or it was a Phoenician guy by the name Menelaus. Menelaus had come to Egypt to take a lady who was called Helen. Helen had been captured, I think, by Phoenicians, if I'm not wrong, and then she had been brought to Egypt, and then Menelaus had to come to Egypt to claim her. And when Menelaus comes to Egypt, he's given Helen, and he wants to leave, but the coast is turbulent. There is a lot of storm and what, and he feels like he becomes impatient. He wants to leave Egypt, but this weather is not allowing him to leave. So what Melanas does, he captures two Egyptian kids and he sacrifices them. He sacrifices them. I don't remember to which god, but he sacrifices them to some god so that the sea will be calm so that he will leave. And the Egyptians found out, and in fact, they gave chase and they could not capture him and he disappeared. He went to Libya. Now, but those were not like common things in Egypt. And in fact, the latter case of Menelaus was not like it is Egyptians who did it. It was somebody who came from outside who did it. But of course, and I've told you about the Heracles being sacrificed, and Herodotus himself says he doesn't see how that is even possible because Egyptians didn't do that. Now, let me come to nations that did it like it was so common with them to do it. There is the Massagetae. The Massagetae was a tribe of people who lived, I think, to the east of Persia. And this tribe, their queen killed Cyrus the Great. Cyrus the Great went to war with them and he died while fighting the Massagetae. Now, among the Massagetae, it was common to sacrifice people to gods, but they didn't do it like they capture somebody, just bring them and it was everyone was to be sacrificed to the gods, and it was like the most honorable thing that will happen to you if you end up being sacrificed to the gods. And that happened when you grew old. You reached a certain age that you are very old, and everybody wanted to reach that age, and then you are sacrificed. And how they did it, they killed you basically, and then they picked other animals and they killed them as well as part of the sacrifice, and then they cooked them together. It's not a good thing to think about, but that's what they did. And so for them, everybody aspired to reach that level or that point where they would be old enough to be sacrificed by their kinsmen to the gods. Another tribe that did almost the same thing is a tribe known as the Issedonians, that Herodotus tells us that they lived to the north of the land that was occupied by the Greeks, and generally could be the north of the Black Sea, somewhere around there. And he said the Issedonians did exactly the same thing like the Massagetae. When you grew old, your children will sacrifice you and they'll cook you alongside other animals. And that was like, it was like an honor. And they say they'll use everything of your body and except the skull. And they'll take that skull and they will decorate it with gold and all these things. And then they'll keep it and it will be like something of value that the family will keep. Yeah, so that was their culture. So for these two tribes, the Massagetae and the Issedonians, it was like everyone. In fact, those who died before they reached that age of being sacrificed, it was not a good thing. Everybody considered it not to be a good thing that you died before you could be sacrificed. Now, but then there are those that force people, of course, like they could capture people and sacrifice them. Herodotus tells us this story as a tangent when he tells us of Xerxes' march in Europe. Now Xerxes is in Europe, he's attacking the local tribes, and as he goes over the land, he comes to the land of the people known as the Achaeans. They were Europeans, but they were not Greeks. And then he's told about the culture of the Achaeans, and he tells that the Achaeans have this temple of Jupiter. Uh, and in this temple, they will capture some of their members and take them there and they sacrifice them to Jupiter. But then he's told that something used to happen that, of course, if you are captured and you are taken to be sacrificed, you will be so fearful. And some of the people will escape and run. And he was told that when these people ran away, if you ran away, you escaped, even if you disappeared for 20 years, and then you came back home, and then they discover that you were once captured, they say that anybody who had been taken to the temple to be sacrificed, he had to be sacrificed. So even if it's 20, 30 years and you come back, they'll still capture you and sacrifice you to the gods. So yeah, so the entire book of Herodotus, there's a lot of sacrificing. Sacrificing was a very critical part of most societies in that time. And most societies sacrificed animals and offered plants to the gods. But then there were those that did go to the extreme. And as I've mentioned, even those that it was not their custom to do it, for some reason, sometimes they found it necessary to do it. Like I've mentioned of the Persians, it was not like a common thing for the Persians to sacrifice humans. But I've given you a case where when they went to attack Greece, in fact, as Xerxes was trying to capture Greece, the very first battle they had, they captured this guy called Leo and they sacrificed him to, I think, to Jupiter, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, so that's about sacrificing in the ancient world.